All right, ladies and gents, today we're going to talk about solving problems that deal with percentages. Now, the past couple days we've been talking about proportions and ratios and things, and a percent just happens to be a special ratio in that our second quantity that we're comparing to will always be 100. So if I'm talking about 84%, what I actually mean is it's 84 100ths, or 84 out of 100 parts. Right? Another way to represent it would be 0.84. Okay, so 0.84 is equivalent to 84 100ths. Okay, so having an understanding about percentages is actually going to be very helpful, not only in math class, but in our lives outside of school. Or if you're studying statistics in sports, maybe if you're doing taxes, maybe like sales tax, so you're buying an item and you have to apply a 13% sales tax on it. Or your wage increases, maybe you go to your boss and say, you know what, I would like a 25% wage increase, and having an understanding of how much extra money could you actually make if you in fact had that 25% increase. Or sales commission, maybe you work at a clothing store and you get 10% of your sales. So you would want to have an understanding of how much money you would make based on a commission. All right, so finding a percent involves us finding equivalent fractions. And this is similar to what we were talking about yesterday with parts per total. So if I had part of a total amount, maybe it's 10% out of a total of, 10 pieces out of 100 parts, what would that be equivalent to as a percentage? All right. Now, many times in the wording of a question, it might be easier to think of parts per total as is and of instead, right? So parts per total could be written as is of, or is compared to of, is equal to some percent out of 100, right? So the whole, when you're reading a question, the whole piece is usually preceded by the word of, meaning you'll see of and then some extra piece of information. And that extra piece of information usually is the whole part. Now, another clue that you might see is if you see the word is, right? So if you see the word is, whatever comes after it is usually the part piece, right? So you would hear something like what is 60%, right? So you would say that would be the part, okay? Now, unfortunately, when I PDF'd this here to record the lesson, question 1 kind of got cut off here. So it reads, answer each of the following questions by setting up an appropriate proportion and solving for the unknown. Round all answers to the nearest tenth, so that's 1 decimal. Oh my gosh. There we go. 1 decimal where appropriate. That should be a C. 1 decimal where appropriate. All right, so if we look at what number is, there's an important piece of information, 18% of 100. 200. So of means 200 is the whole piece, and 18 is the part. So if we represented this would be 18%. So we remember percents are always relative to 100. So 18% is 18 out of 100. And we want 18% of 200. So I'm looking for something that is equivalent to 18 out of 200. Right? So another way to look at this is 18 compared to 100 is what compared to 200? All right? So I'm sure most people could say, okay, it's double because 100 to 200, you just double 18. So you should get 36. But how do we get that here? Okay, so let's use our understanding of how to undo or reverse operations to solve for x. So looking at this, I have x divided by 200. So I would want to multiply both sides of the equation by 200. And if I do that to the left-hand side, here's our 200. And I multiply everything out. The x divided by 200 multiplied by 200 is going to lead me to just simply x. Now if I multiply out my right hand side, I get, say, 3600, which is my 200 times 18 divided by 100, and you end up having 36%. So what I can say is 18% of 200 is 36. Oops, is actually just 36. So 36 is equal to x. Okay? Now, if we looked at the next problem, 42 is what percent of 98? Now, that tells to me that 42 is what percent of 98. So I'm looking for a percentage. Right? So 42 is the part of 98 is the whole piece, and I'm looking for a percent. So I say the percents are x divided by 100. And again, I want to solve for x here. All right, so multiply both sides by 100 to eliminate the fraction, or eliminate the denominator here. And if I multiply 100 by 42 divided by 98, I ended up with 42 decimal. Well, I want one decimal place, so if it comes out to 85, which will round to 9 as one decimal. So I have 42.9 as my x. Right? So 42.9 42 out of 98 is about 42.9%. So I need to put my percentage sign in here, because that's what we were asked to find, was what percent. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and look at problem C here. It says 6% of 240,000 is what number? All right, so of tells me that the 240,000 is my whole part. So that tells me that I have 24000, and I'm looking for what number is equivalent to this, and it's going to be 6%. So that's divided by 100, 6 100ths, and I'm trying to solve for x here. So if we do that, we multiply both sides again by the 240,000, and I have here 6 100ths, and then I have to complete the right hand side. 4 0 1 2 3, and I multiply by 240,000. The right hand side simply becomes x. My left hand side, if I could do 240,000 multiplied by 6 divide it by 100, I end up with 14,400. And there we go. So I found out what 6% of 240,000 is, and it's 14,400. All right, and the last problem here, if I want to find out what 12% of what number is this 1,044. So I know that the part here is 1,044 because it is preceded by the word is. So I know that 1,044 is the part, and I want 12% of what number? So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the whole part there. Okay? So my left-hand side is just 12%. So 12 divided by 100. All right, so we had a trick because my variable was in the denominator. We could reciprocate both sides. So let's go ahead and do that to bring the variable to the numerator. So I reciprocated my left-hand side, meaning that the denominator came to the numerator and the numerator came to the denominator. That's going to be equal to x divided by 1,044, because I do the same thing to the right-hand side. If I reciprocate the left, I have to reciprocate the right, and I'm solving for x. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 1,044. That's multiplied multiplied by 100 twelfths, and I get x divided by 1044, and I multiply 1044. And if I solve for x here, my right hand side becomes x. My left hand side here, sorry about that. My left hand side is 1044 multiplied by 100 divided by 12, and that leaves me with 8,700. Okay, so we've looked at 4 different problems here. I was looking for what number was equivalent to 18% of something else, so of the 200. I looked at 42 is what percent of 98, so it's a different type of question, but notice how the approach was similar. Set up a percentage, and I'm looking for a part here. Or I could look at it as 6% of some number is what number. Okay, so 6% of 240,000 is what number. Notice how I set it up again like a proportion and equivalent fractions, and I could find my part. Or I could have at the end that I'm looking for the whole piece and I was given a percentage. So all of these, notice that the same kind of setup was used for them, but the question was slightly worded differently, and it depended on what I was looking for.